Saruman is a character that I feel needs very little introduction. I mean, he's the Lord of Isengard, the White Wizard, both wise and duplicitous. His character highlights some of Tolkien's main beliefs, and his downfall and death are some of the most deservedly satisfying moments in the entire story. Saruman is also one of the few characters who, despite undergoing fairly significant change when it comes to the Peter Jackson adaptation, he still manages to be a very special and interesting character, whilst highlighting some of the things that make the book and movies so different. Today, we're talking all about Saruman, investigating his role in the story, his incredibly unique powers, and his utterly tragic downfall. From as early as his character introduction, we see major divergences between how the book presents Saruman and how the movies do. In the films, it is done chronologically. Gandalf leaves Frodo and Sam to start off on their adventure, and then we cut away to see him speaking to this supposedly wise wizard. This makes this scene part of that first bout of rising action, of rising tension, and it also means that we need to learn pretty much all of our introductory information about Saruman from this scene. This is the first we're hearing of him, and the first we're meeting him. The book plays its hand rather differently. The first that we hear of Gandalf and what went down in Isengard is in the Council of Elrond, when Gandalf is explaining his absence. This makes sense for practical reasons, since we've been tracking Frodo as our primary POV character, so he wouldn't have known what happened to Gandalf until then, so we, as the audience, find out at the same time as him. But it also means that we go into this scene with a lot more context. We've had time to live in the world a bit, we understand what evil looks like in Middle-earth, plus we have Gandalf narrating what happened so that we can get any extra context that we might need. And this device, while it worked perfectly well in the book, I don't think it would have served quite as well in the films. First of all, the Council of Elrond was already a tricky scene. It's very long, incredibly exposition heavy, and the only action is people sitting around in a circle talking. Stories within stories don't play out particularly well in a movie, just generally speaking. But I also think that moving this scene up into its chronological place does a lot to establish Saruman as the main villain, at least in the eyes of the audience. You see, The Lord of the Rings is fairly unique because it doesn't really have a bad guy. Of course, Sauron is the main antagonist, but we don't meet him face to face. He doesn't exactly have a personality that we can relate to, discuss, or latch onto. There are a few paragraphs here and there that discuss what he's thinking and what's happening to him, but those are few and far between, and most of them are in the later book, meaning that, especially in the beginning of the first book, he's more so a force acting on the world, not so much getting involved in the minutiae of everyday events. Of course, there are orcs and trolls and Nazgul and Uruk-hai, but for the most part those are a faceless mass, especially in the first book. The closest thing that we get to an active protagonist having a constant impact on the characters is probably the ring, and that is given some of its own character traits, but we're really able to access those because it's a book, because we're able to use the point of view to crawl into the characters and see through their eyes. But with movies, that is a difficult thing to show. Even though they do a fairly good job at it, I don't think the ring in the movies has quite as much presence as it does in the book. Plus, audiences were going into this movie thinking that it was an action movie, and when they're seeing an action movie, they expect to have some kind of a villain that they can root against. Enter Saruman. Saruman lures Gandalf into Orthanc, at first playing it coy.
My old friend.
Saruman calling him old friend is both meant to lull Gandalf into a sense of false security, and it also lets the audience in on their former relationship. And then Gandalf's response to that, a bow of respect, lets us in on their power dynamic. It is excellent in-the-moment exposition. The high-quality exposition continues as Gandalf and Saruman discuss what's going on in the world, but all the while, Gandalf and the audience are feeling this creeping, growing sense of dread. Not all is well. Orthanc is this ominous, looming presence over their conversation. Saruman is highly critical of Gandalf's more rustic habits. They pass from the gardens into the dark, claustrophobic inner chambers of the tower, and the camera rocks us on unsteady legs through this new environment. They're able to let us in on what Gandalf and Saruman's usual relationship is like, just in time for us to understand that what's going on is unusual. It is so beautifully done. But by the time we fully realize just how far gone Saruman is, the trap snaps closed. Saruman reveals that he has fully given his power over to Sauron. He reveals that the Nazgul are about to come after Frodo to try and kill him to get the ring, and Gandalf is going to be imprisoned. They give us a glimpse of the Palantir, of the larger danger that is to come, and a flash of Sauron's burning eye. It sets Saruman up as the perfect villain at this point in the story. He is a physical, identifiable manifestation of Sauron's power, and he is an active and present danger to the characters that we've come to love. Now, this is quite different from the source material. In the books, there's no effort to play it coy because Gandalf is narrating. He lets us know from the get-go that something is off. "So you have come, Gandalf," Saruman said to me gravely, but in his eyes there seemed to be a white light, as if a cold laughter was in his heart. He accuses Gandalf of deceiving and lurking, and he declares himself to now be Saruman the Wise, Saruman the Ringmaker, and no longer Saruman the White, but Saruman of many colors. I looked then and saw that his robes, which had seemed white, were not so, but were woven of all colors, and if he moved, they shimmered and changed hue so that the eye was bewildered. "I liked white better," I said. "White," he sneered. "It serves as a beginning. White cloth may be dyed, the white page can be overwritten, and the white light can be broken. In which case it is no longer white," said I. "And he that breaks a thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom." I love that Tolkien starts this conversation with this moment, because it is truly emblematic of Saruman's entire philosophy, of the deep belief rift between the two wizards. Saruman believes that there is no single truth, that white light is weak. By breaking the truth, by breaking that white light into its many thousands of facets, he is able to control it, to make the light his own. Gandalf, the true believer, knows that this is folly. I am a little bit bitter that we didn't get to see this scene play out in the movies, mostly because that costume would have been spectacular, but I can admit that it is a philosophically dense moment, and I'm not sure it would have played so well so early in the movie, especially having just been introduced to this character as Saruman the White. But back in the book, Saruman anticipated Gandalf's resistance, and so he carries on with his pre-prepared speech. He warns Gandalf that times have changed, and he grants him a choice. He can continue to ally himself with elves and men, to consign himself to eventual destruction at the hands of their enemy, or he can join with Saruman in joining their power to Sauron, and get enough sway to control the world in the way that they will. Saruman explains, "As the power grows, its proved friends will also grow, and the wise, such as you and I, may with patience come at last to direct its courses, to control it. We can bide our time, we can keep our thoughts in our hearts, deploring maybe evils done by the way, but approving the high and ultimate purpose. Knowledge, rule, order, all the things that we have so far striven in vain to accomplish, hindered rather than helped by our weak or idle friends. There need not be, there would not be, any real change in our designs, only in our means." Saruman wants the ring. He believes that he has enough strength of will to overcome Sauron and use the ring for his own purposes. But Gandalf knows that this kind of thinking only serves the enemy rather than hindering him. Gandalf refuses, and so Saruman imprisons him atop the Tower of Orthanc, until he either confesses the location of the ring, or the ring is found and he can choose a suitable punishment for the Grey Wizard. In the movies, this all ends in a much more dramatic fashion, and while I won't say that this scene is my favorite, because frankly I think it looks a little bit silly, I do understand the motivation behind it. Saruman has not proven himself to be someone that can be reasoned with, so Gandalf doesn't try. They've shown us the Palantir and indicated the corruption that has eaten away at Saruman's higher faculties. Instead of mere imprisonment, of just escorting him off to prison, they instead decided to give us a visual representation of what's going on. They allowed us to see Gandalf, who at this point has been the most strong, powerful, and wise character that we know in the story thus far, be utterly crushed by the enemy. They're using the visual language of film to up the tension, the drama, and the stakes. So despite looking silly, I don't object to this concept of the two of them fighting and Gandalf being defeated on a conceptual level. From here, Saruman takes up a much more active role in the film. We cut back to him frequently, seeing as he obeys Sauron's orders to destroy the forest and create an army. He's responsible for sending out the Uruk-hai that destroy the Fellowship. He's the one that causes the storms that force the Fellowship into the Hornet's Nest of Moria, and he is directly responsible for the destruction of the Westfold in the Two Towers. Look, I don't know about you guys, but if the Dark Lord Sauron approached me asking me to amass an army to take over the civilized world, I would not currently have the finances to make that happen. Fortunately, I've been able to start working towards my financial goals using this video's sponsor, Rocket Money. Now that I've been doing YouTube full-time for a couple of months, I've been trying to save money where I can, and that means canceling subscription services that I don't really use. But these services make it so difficult to cancel them. It took me a full 2 days and an email to customer service to cancel one of them. But luckily, this video's sponsor, Rocket Money, is here to help. Rocket Money is the personal finance app that helps you cancel subscriptions, lower bills, and manage your money better. It has been awesome for canceling my unwanted subscriptions because the app will safely and securely identify recurring charges and cancel unwanted subscriptions for you. You can cancel from within the app with just a couple of taps. There's no more need for those terrible customer service calls. Rocket Money will also analyze your spending habits to create a custom budget that works with your lifestyle. Plus, they'll automatically monitor your spending by category, and you'll get notifications when you've exceeded your limits so that you can stay on track. Rocket Money has helped save its customers up to $740 a year when they use all the app's premium features, with over $500 million in canceled subscriptions. So if you'd like to save more and spend less, join the over 5 million members using Rocket Money today. Just go to rocketmoney.com/Shire or use the link in my description to get started for free. You can unlock even more features with premium. That's rocketmoney.com/Shire to get started for free. Thank you so much to Rocket Money for sponsoring this video, and thanks to all of you for checking out my sponsors when I have them. Saruman takes up a much more active role in the films, often inciting the violence that our heroes must face. And all of this build-up of the importance of his character makes it all the more disappointing that he just disappears at the end of the Two Towers. His defeat and what happens to him is not shown in the theatrical cut of the movies, so I guess audiences were just left to assume that he had died somewhere off camera or drowned, which, for people who have been primed for fantasy TV and movies, know that he's probably not dead at all, so they were probably expecting him to pop back up or whatever, and I think it was a really bad choice for them to not include anything about what happened to Saruman in the theatrical cut. I understand that the third movie already has a lot going on in it, but with how much they emphasized his character in the first and second movies, I do think that was an absolute misstep. Now, fortunately, we did get some semblance of the voice of Saruman seen in the extended cut of the movies, but it doesn't quite live up to the standards set by the books. In the books, we are introduced to the character of Saruman in the Council of Elrond, but we don't meet him face to face until this scene. He's caused a lot of bad things to happen, his name has been floated around, but this is the first time that we're meeting him face to face, and Tolkien makes sure that it is a memorable introduction. Suddenly, another voice spoke, low and melodious, its very sound an enchantment. Those who listened unwarily to that voice could seldom report the words that they heard. And if they did, they wondered, for little power remained in them. Mostly, they remembered only that it was a delight to hear the voice speaking. All that it said seemed wise and reasonable, and desire woke in them by swift agreement to seem wise themselves. None were unmoved. None rejected its pleas and its commands without an effort of mind and will, so long as its master had control of it. At this point in the story, Saruman is practically powerless. His armies are defeated, his last man standing is Wormtongue, and he has nothing. And the people standing below listening to him have every reason in the world to resent him. He has killed their friends and their family, and yet even those with the most righteous anger are nearly swayed by the power of his voice. Saruman tries to pry his way into Theoden's mind, offering him peace for the price of compliance, but when that fails, he preys on Gandalf once more. I endeavored to advise you for your own good, but you scarcely listened. You are proud and do not love advice, having indeed a store of your own wisdom. But on that occasion you erred, I think, misconstruing my intentions willfully. I fear that in my eagerness to persuade you I lost patience, and indeed I regret it, for I bore you no ill will, and even now I bear none, though you return to me in the company of the violent and the ignorant. How should I? Are we not both members of a high and ancient order, most excellent in Middle-earth? Our friendship would profit us both alike. Much we could still accomplish together to heal the disorders of the world. Let us understand one another and dismiss from thought these lesser folk. Let them wait on our decisions. For the common good, I am willing to redress the past and to receive you. Will you not consult with me? Will you not come up? So great was the power that Saruman exerted in this last effort, that none that stood within hearing were unmoved. This whole scene is such a masterclass in rhetoric. Saruman never lets up. It is a constant onslaught of highly modern and carefully chosen words. It's these constantly pivoting viewpoints, slithering about a person, searching for that one gap in the armor of their reason. Gandalf is able to resist the temptation of these arguments, but it is a surprisingly close thing. The movies, while we do get some semblance of this scene, don't quite give Saruman this same eloquence and power. Instead of trying to use reason and rhetoric to get his way, Saruman tries to intimidate them, hammering away at the sheer hopelessness of their situation. Encouraging hopelessness is a tool that Saruman uses in the books, and I will give the writers credit for that, but Tolkien takes it a step further than mere hopelessness. In his analysis of the Voice of Saruman scene, Chad Chisholm writes, "Here, Saruman uses the rhetoric of impossibility, not to create a picture of an impossible battle or inevitability, but of a different impossibility, that no act can have value, no deed can be heroic. Knowledge of the past, even if personally experienced, is questionable, and there is an ineluctable equivalence between the just and the unjust." The movies get to the first step, establishing the impossibility of their efforts, but it fails to deliver on the consequences of that argument. If failure is inevitable, what place do right and wrong have in the decisions that we make? Isn't there a certain point that we get to where the ends can justify the means? In the movies, this scene is primarily used to demonstrate Saruman's own hopelessness, his utter despair as his house of cards collapses around him. It scares those listening, it confirms their worst and darkest fears, but it doesn't seem to lure them in and convince them in the same way that the books do. In the movies, this scene wraps up with Saruman's brutal death, and I think it's fairly well done. He provokes Wormtongue, Wormtongue stabs him, he falls to his death. It is efficient and not completely devoid of symbolism. Saruman's fall is emphasized. He's tumbling down through the air for a long time and the camera follows him. It is a long fall, not just off of the tower, but from grace and from reason, from the position of privilege that he once occupied. I also appreciate that in the end he is gored on one of the relics of his own industrial inclinations, this giant wheel. There's a cruel irony in how driven he was towards progress, towards mechanization, towards creating these new machines, and then that is also how he meets his death and the desecration of his body. Then the wheel turns, and Saruman is plunged into his watery grave head first. Classically, being buried upside down like this was a sign of great shame. You would be damned, since your soul would go down to hell instead of heaven. It is honestly a fairly symbolically packed scene, and it is done quite efficiently. It works well for the constraints that they were operating under. Plus, it doesn't get much more Peter Jackson-y than having a guy be speared on a giant spike. That's classic Peter Jackson. Now, granted, all of that death stuff is a significant deviation from the source material. In the book, all of this goes down not during the Voice of Saruman scene, but much later, during the scouring of the Shire. The scouring of the Shire is an interesting scene, and it will definitely get its own video someday, because it's a bit of an oddball. It's this random bit of drama that pops up after you think that all of the drama has already concluded, but it is also where Saruman meets his final end after escaping the Ents at Isengard. This is a significant moment for a number of reasons. First off, it ties a nice bow on the environmental themes that have been running through the whole story. Saruman embodies a ruthless pursuit of technological progress, a mindset that sees the natural world as a tool, something to be used and discarded. He enacts this Sarumanism, as Tolkien calls it, upon the Shire, destroying the community and the landscape that once made it so special. The hobbits return and are able to overcome this, to drive Saruman out, and to forge their own more gradual, mindful path into the future. His defeat in the Shire also represents the ultimate humiliation for Saruman. He once looked down upon the Shire and its inhabitants. He saw them as the lowest of the low, far beyond his world-possessing ambitions. But by the end, his measly power is barely enough to lay a tenuous claim over the Shire, and when Frodo and the others return, they rip that power out from under him completely. Frodo then shows him mercy, refusing even to kill him, which is probably an even greater blow on his vast pride. With the Shire out of his grasp, Saruman gropes for the last bit of power and control that he has, his control over the shriveled embarrassment that has become Wormtongue. He lashes out at him, kicking him in his groveling face and demanding his continued obedience, and it is this last vain reach towards power that is his death knell. At that, something snapped. Suddenly, Wormtongue rose up, drawing a hidden knife, and then with a snarl like a dog, he sprang on Saruman's back, jerked his head back, and cut his throat, and with a yell ran off down the lane. To the dismay of those that stood by, about the body of Saruman a grey mist gathered, and rising slowly to a great height like smoke from a fire, as a pale shrouded figure it loomed over the hill. For a moment it wavered, looking to the west, but out of the west came a cold wind, and it bent away, and with a sigh dissolved into nothing. Saruman, who, for the sake of rhetoric, for the sake of winning an argument, was willing to rip the truth apart into its component parts, is likewise torn to his component parts, turned into a mist, and blown away by the slightest breeze. He believed in nothing, and so he became nothing. It is perhaps the ultimate humiliation for someone like Saruman, someone who saw the stars being born, who walked the earth before mankind existed, to be dissolved into nothing on a dirt road under the eyes of hobbits. Now, I love the Scouring of the Shire scene, but I'm not going to try to argue that it should have been included in the movies. Books are written to be put down. You can read a chapter or 12 chapters, and then you can put it down for the night and pick it up the next day. Movies are not like that. They are made to be watched in one sitting. And The Return of the King, especially the extended edition, is already so long it can barely be watched in one sitting. Plus, I think that the Scouring of the Shire works so well in its written form. You have this great epic story that has finally come to its catastrophic conclusion, and then you have this one more little bit of story that just feels like a story. It takes the scale and scope way, way down and tells us about these brave hobbits that drove the crazy ruffian out of their home. I don't think that that would have worked in the movies, especially with how exhausted everyone is by this point in the story, but I absolutely think it is the superior version of Saruman's death. It is such a rich and beautiful way to conclude this character's tragic fall. Now, while that is the case, I still love the movie's presentation of Saruman, and that is definitely due to my bias, because I really love what Christopher Lee gave to this role. Christopher Lee was a master of his craft in so many ways, and The Lord of the Rings was kind of a perfect place for that to shine. He had been a lifelong fan of The Lord of the Rings, and so it was one of his lifelong ambitions to be part of a good movie created from the books. He read the book at least once every single year of his adult life, and he was the only person on set to have actually met Tolkien when he was alive. His co-stars said that every time he was on set, it was like having the ghost of Tolkien himself there. These movies and this role was a passion project for him, undoubtedly. Christopher Lee's experience in the movie business also uniquely qualified him for a film like The Lord of the Rings. He got a start in movies that were, well, let's just say that they weren't quite as thoughtfully and intentionally written as The Lord of the Rings. He played bit parts in cheap action-adventure movies for a couple of years, and when his big break finally came, it was in the 1957 Hammer Films production, The Curse of Frankenstein. He played the monster, and I've got to say, it is a really fun movie, even if it's not the best writing or production that you'll ever see ever. Hammer Films were absolutely prolific in the 50s and 60s, and they produced some of the very first horror color pictures, but they weren't exactly well known for their quality. They were schlocky flicks splashed in multicolored gore, so sensational that they were able to pull in audiences because they were fun and not because of quality. And yet, in that framework, Christopher Lee created art. After he proved himself to be a hit in Frankenstein, Lee starred in their next big success, the horror of Dracula, as the titular character. He brought a suave sensuality to the role, an aristocratic elegance, even when surrounded by buckets of blood and scantily clad women. He learned early on in his career that the man makes the role. This is the energy that he brought to the set of The Lord of the Rings. No matter what hurdles the script threw at him, no matter how it differed from the books, he was able to imbue Saruman with some of his original grace, with the power of his honeyed tongue. Even when his character is in the throes of madness, he brings an elegance to the role, a sense of command and authority. Even though they turned him into an action movie villain, Christopher Lee made that character feel like so much more. This kind of interaction, the total symbiosis between a character and their actor, is one of the unique advantages of film. The character in the books is beautifully and masterfully written, but he will never have the same kind of pathos, the human soul that Christopher Lee was able to bring to that role. Saruman is far from a simple character. He represents one of the many facets of evil, but it is such a creeping, corrupting type of evil. It's not pure, but it's one that corrupts and corrodes, one that slides under your skin and rots you from the inside out until you think you're trying to do good, but instead you have become a servant of evil. And while the books will always be the original and purest distillation of this character, I think that we are really lucky to be able to see so many people taking this character and making it their own. The book version of this character is obviously a powerhouse and just incredibly written, but I have such a soft spot for Christopher Lee, so I don't think I can pick my favorite of these two characters in this one. But let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you can pick a favorite, let me know which one that would be. We're getting into cold and flu season, and it kind of feels like I swallowed a cheese grater, so if I sounded like that today, I am terribly sorry. When it gets cold out here in my studio, my tongue does not work very well for the speaking, but I bought a heater this year, so at least it won't be 30 degrees in here while I'm trying to record anymore. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it or it made you think, because that really helps me out, and consider subscribing if you want to come hang out here every week to hear me talk about stuff. Thank you so much for joining me this week, and I hope that you have a very happy, hobbity day.